Good evening.
Hi, friends.
We interrupt tonight's program.
Do you hear them outside?
Do not answer your door.
The missing episode of Mr. Patchwork. A VHS After Midnight story. I was 8 years old when my mother banned me from watching Channel 8 after dark. At the time, I thought she was overreacting. Every kid in our town watched Mr. Patchwork's Playhouse. It aired every weekday at 4:30 p.m., right after cartoons and before the local news. The show had puppets, songs, puzzles, and these cheap handmade sets that looked like they'd been built in somebody's garage. But kids loved it, especially me. The host was a tall man named Mr. Patchwork who wore colourful sweaters stitched together from mismatched fabrics. Every episode opened with the same cheerful jingle. Stitches and stories, songs and smiles. Stay a while with Mr. Patchwork. The show looked old even when it was new. Static flickered constantly across the screen. The audio popped. Sometimes the colours warped green for a few seconds before correcting themselves. But that only made it feel warmer somehow. Like you were watching something homemade, something real. My favourite character was a puppet named Clover. Clover had button eyes, orange yarn hair, and a crooked stitched smile that never changed no matter what emotion she was supposed to be feeling. She talked in a soft, whispery voice and always sat beside Mr. Patchwork during story time. As a kid, I thought she was adorable. Now, I can barely look at pictures of her. The episode everyone remembers was called The Quiet Game. Officially, it never existed. No station archives, no reruns, no recordings. At least, that's what people claimed. But I know it existed because I watched it. And 20 years later, I found the tape again. The VHS appeared in a cardboard box outside my apartment door. No postage, no return address, just a single sticky note attached to the top. It read, "You remembered." So did he. Inside the box was an unmarked black VHS cassette. No label except a faded strip of masking tape across the front with one handwritten phrase, "Playhouse, do not air." The second I saw it, my stomach dropped, because I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's. I hadn't thought about Mr. Patchwork's Playhouse in years. Not really. Like most childhood memories, it had become foggy around the edges. But holding that tape in my hands felt like opening a locked room in my head. Suddenly, I remembered things I didn't want to remember. The static, the music, Clover's face, and the final episode. I should have thrown the tape away. Instead, around midnight, I dug my old VHS player out of storage and pressed play. Static filled the television. Then the familiar theme song crackled through the speakers. The episode began normally. Too normally. Mr. Patchwork sat in his usual armchair beneath the paper sun decorations, while Clover bounced excitedly beside him. The set looked exactly how I remembered it. Cheap painted walls, crooked shelves, handmade alphabet blocks, dust floating through warm studio lights. But something felt wrong immediately. The audience laughter track was missing. The silence underneath the show felt enormous. Mr. Patchwork smiled at the camera, but he looked tired. Not actor tired, real tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "Hello, friends," he said softly. "Today, we're going to play the quiet game." Clover clapped excitedly. "The quiet game," she whispered. "That's my favorite." The camera zoomed slightly too close to her face. One button eye reflected the studio light strangely, almost wet-looking. Mr. Patchwork continued smiling. "The rules are very simple," he explained. "You stay very quiet and listen carefully." The screen flickered. For half a second, another frame appeared, a dark hallway. Then it vanished. I paused the tape immediately, rewound, played it again. The hallway was still there, barely visible beneath the static. I felt cold suddenly, because I remembered that hallway. I'd seen it before. When I was a kid, my mother used to work late shifts at St. Mercy Hospital downtown. Most nights she came home exhausted and barely spoke during dinner. But after the quiet game aired, something changed. She became paranoid. She unplugged televisions before bed, covered mirrors at night, checked the locks 3 or 4 times before sleeping. One night, I asked her why. She stared at me for a long time before answering, then quietly said, "Some things shouldn't talk to children." At the time, I assumed she meant television in general. Now I know, she meant the show. Back on the tape, the episode continued. Mr. Patchwork sat motionless while Clover whispered instructions to the audience. "If you hear knocking," she said, "don't answer the door. If you hear scratching, don't look under the bed. And if someone calls your name after bedtime," she tilted her head slowly, "pretend you're asleep." The screen warped violently for a moment. Audio crackled. Mr. Patchwork sat motionless while Clover whispered instructions to the audience. "If you hear knocking," she said, "don't answer the door. If you hear scratching, don't look under the bed. And if someone calls your name after bedtime," she tilted her head slowly, "pretend you're asleep." The screen warped violently for a moment. Audio crackled. Then Mr. Patchwork interrupted her, not playfully, urgently. "Clover," he said sharply, "that's enough." The puppet turned toward him. Her stitched smile never changed, but somehow she suddenly looked furious. The camera remained completely still for several uncomfortable seconds. Then Clover spoke softly. "They told me to say it." Silence. Mr. Patchwork stared directly into the camera. Not at the audience, at me, or at least that's how it felt. Then he forced another smile. Time for our song. The music started, except I recognized it, not from television, from childhood. It was the same melody my mother used to hum while cleaning the kitchen late at night. A slow, sad lullaby. The tape glitched again. This time the hallway returned. Longer, dark, narrow, dim fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. At the very end of the hall stood someone tall and motionless, watching the camera. Static swallowed the image before I could make out its face. About halfway through the episode, something happened I still can't fully explain. The broadcast changed, not visually, emotionally. The warmth disappeared. Mr. Patchwork stopped smiling as much. The puppets barely moved. Even the lighting looked colder somehow. Then the phone rang on set, an old rotary telephone sitting beside the bookshelf. I remembered that phone. It appeared in every episode, but it never rang. Mr. Patchwork froze, staring at it. Clover whispered, "You should answer." He didn't move. The phone rang again. Longer this time. Finally, slowly, he picked it up. No voice came through the speaker, just static, then faintly, children laughing. Mr. Patchwork's face changed instantly. Not fear, recognition, like hearing someone he'd spent years trying to forget. Very quietly, he whispered, "No." The static crackled louder, then I said no. Clover stared at him silently from the rocking chair. The tape distorted violently. Frames skipped, audio stretched, colors bled together, and beneath the distortion, for one horrifying second, I saw children standing behind the set walls, perfectly still, watching. I paused the tape again. My apartment felt too quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and suddenly I remembered the rumors from my hometown. Back in the early 90s, several children disappeared within the same 2-year period. Nobody ever connected the cases publicly, But parents whispered about it constantly, mostly because of one strange detail. Every missing child had reportedly been watching Mr. Patchwork's playhouse shortly before vanishing. As kids, we treated it like an urban legend. Now, I wasn't so sure. The final 10 minutes of the tape barely resembled children's television anymore. The set lights dimmed repeatedly. Clover stopped speaking entirely, and Mr. Patchwork looked increasingly panicked between camera cuts. At one point, he leaned close to the lens and whispered, "If anyone finds this tape, don't let children watch after midnight." The screen cut to black for nearly 20 seconds. Then the image returned. Only now the set was empty. No host, no puppets, just the static hum of the studio. Somewhere off camera, something dragged slowly across the floor. The microphone picked up quiet breathing, then footsteps. The camera began moving, not smoothly like television equipment, shakily, handheld, like someone carrying it. The person behind the camera walked through the set toward a narrow hallway, hidden behind the painted walls. The same hallway from earlier. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Every door along the corridor stood slightly open. Inside each room sat pieces of the show. Puppet heads, costumes, children's drawings taped to walls. Then the camera reached the final door. It was already open. Inside sat Clover, motionless in a chair, facing the corner. The camera operator whispered, "Jesus Christ." Clover slowly turned her head. The puppet's mouth moved on its own. No puppeteer visible, and in a tiny, whispering voice, she said, "You stayed too long." The screen exploded into static. I almost turned the tape off right there. I wish I had, because the final scene lasted only 30 seconds, and it ruined the show forever. The static cleared one last time. Mr. Patchwork sat alone on the darkened set. No music, no puppets, no smile, just exhaustion. He looked directly into the camera and said, "They only come when someone keeps watching." Then softly, "I tried to make it safe." Something moved behind him in the darkness. Tall, thin, wrong. Mr. Patchwork noticed it immediately. His eyes widened, not surprised, terrified, like it had finally come back. The figure leaned down beside him and whispered something into his ear. I never heard what it said, because the audio cut out completely. Mr. Patchwork began crying silently. Then the screen went black. The tape ended. I sat frozen in my apartment for a long time afterward. The VHS player hissed softly in the dark. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. Against my better judgment, I answered. At first, there was only static. Then very softly, a familiar whispering voice said, "Are you still watching?" The line disconnected. I unplugged the television immediately. That was 3 months ago. Since then, strange things have started happening around my apartment. The television turns itself on around 4:30 p.m. Static appears briefly on video files. Sometimes late at night, I hear soft humming from the hallway outside my bedroom. The same lullaby my mother used to sing. Last week, I called her and finally asked about the tape. Long silence followed. Then quietly she said, "I hoped they destroyed all the copies." I asked her who they were. She never answered. Instead, she asked me one question, a question that still keeps me awake at night. She asked, "Did Clover speak directly to you yet?" Then she hung up. And ever since that conversation, I've started noticing something terrifying. Sometimes late at night, when the apartment is completely silent, my television emits the faintest crackle of static, and somewhere beneath it, I can hear children laughing.